fourth Latin American Caribbean Days. We will have today a webinar on water-related disaster risk management in changing climate. And I would like to introduce Ms. Mateja Norčić-Štamcar, who is Acting Director General of the Directorate for Political Affairs from the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs of Slovenia. Please.
Yes, thank you very much. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, dear Mr. Guzman, I am honored to welcome you at the LAC Days 2022, the fourth annual multi-layered conference organized by our ministry, by Slovenian ministry, also together with the Bled Strategic Forum, and is the fourth one since 2018. Slovenia has developed very rich relations with the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, and mainly based on people-to-people ties established for the last 2 centuries, and for this we're really very proud of and very grateful. In addition of our good cooperation within multilateral organizations and initiatives, show many shared approaches to solving challenges and threats, as well as reflect our common interests. To enhance our cooperation with the region, Slovenia has decided to organize and host the Latin America Days and the Caribbean Days. LAC Days aim to bring together the representatives from the governments, NGOs, academia and businesses from both regions in order to foster cooperation in economy, science and research. Through all years, LAC Days activities paid special attention to environment, being water, forestry, climate, circular economy and renewables. They also have a strong cultural component and serves as forum for exchanging knowledge and best practices. In 2020, we started also with virtual seminars, and during our EU presidency in autumn 2021, added 3 additional thematic virtual seminars addressing circular economy, social cohesion and digitalization. By sharing knowledge and experience, we can unlock immense potential on our partnership. This is something that we strongly believe in and support. Therefore, Slovenia strongly supports the regular bi-regional dialogue between the EU and the LAC countries. At this occasion, I would really like to commend the important role of the EU-LAC Foundation, our partner for many years in strengthening the partnership between the 2 regions. Let me also express our gratitude for your valuable contribution to the discussions at today's virtual seminar, which is really water-related, disaster risk management in changing climate, already the second LAC Days Water Forum, co-organized with Global Water Partnership Slovenia. The contribution that will follow this discussion will address sustainable tourism and digitalization as areas of bi-regional shared challenges and opportunities. This would be an introduction to the next edition of the LAC Days in 2023, which will focus on sustainable tourism, biodiversity, sustainability, beekeeping, and apitourism and other topics of bi-regional synergies. I would really like to thank the EU-LAC Foundation and Executive Director Dr. Bonilla, as well as Global Water Partnership Slovenia, and that is Professor Dr. Barbara Čenčur-Curk, for the co-organization of today's event. We are very proud of this continued partnership with both. So we plan, as said, to organize the 5th LAC Days conference in 2023 as a series of events addressing topics of bi-regional synergies, and I really do hope that I will welcome many of you then there as well. So with this, I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very fruitful webinar seminar today that you have. The Green Slovenia is here for you to help you, especially with the waters. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these nice welcome remarks, Ms. Mateja Norčić-Štamcar. Now we will proceed to opening of the LAC Days in 2022. For opening, we will have a speech from Tanja Fajon, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia.
distinguished panelists, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you at the 4th edition of the LAC Days conference, organized by the Slovenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Bled Strategic Forum. We warmly welcome your participation in today's webinar on water-related disaster risk management in changing climate. For Slovenia, the relations with Latin America and the Caribbean are of strategic importance. The LAC Days conference provides us with a framework for strengthening our dialogue and cooperation. In the past years, the conference has addressed several bilateral and cross-regional synergies. We have put special emphasis on environment, water management, forestry, circular economy, and digitalization. This reflects our strong commitment to working together in partnership and in the spirit of mutual learning. Today's discussion will focus on water and climate. Slovenia has placed water and water diplomacy at the forefront of its foreign policy activities. I have recently named 2 ambassadors at large as special envoys for water diplomacy and for climate diplomacy. Our renowned climatologist and member of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Professor Dr. Lučka Kajfež-Bogataj, is also a member of my Strategic Council on Foreign Affairs. I'm pleased that she will address the conference later on. Slovenia has been calling for accelerated action on water-related challenges globally. We emphasize the relevance of water for human development, preservation of ecosystems, climate resilience, and peace and security. We strongly support the UN's efforts in this regard and are fully engaged in the preparations for the UN conference on water in 2023. In addition, as a candidate for the non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council for the period 2024-25, Slovenia strongly believes that this topic belongs on the agenda of the Council. If elected, we will advocate for continued discussion and action. No country is immune to biodiversity loss, water stress, and impacts of climate change. They affect us all and demand the adaptation and building up of our resilience. For some countries, it is even a matter of survival, and we acknowledge the special vulnerability of the Caribbean region. With this in mind, Slovenia contributes to the Global Environment Facility and promotes green policies and green transition. I'm very pleased to see Latin America and the Caribbean as our partners in the efforts to turn climate and environmental challenges into opportunities and to transform the way we live, produce, consume, and interact with nature. Slovenia is proud of its expertise in environmental issues and stands ready to share its know-how. Before concluding, let me thank the EU-LAC Foundation and the Global Water Partnership Slovenia for co-organizing this event. We are proud of our continued partnership. And once again, I thank you all for taking part in today's conference, and I wish you an interesting and fruitful debate.
Thank you, our Minister of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia, for warm opening of these LAC Days. I would like to invite also Mr. Adrian Bonilla, Executive Director of EU-LAC Foundation, to open the LAC Days.
Your Excellency Tanya Fajon, scholars from the Caribbean and from Slovenia, dear participants. Slovenia is a trusted partner of Latin America and the Caribbean. As during the Slovenian presidency in the European Union, today we study a crucial topic for the strategic agenda between our 2 regions. Climate change is an urgent reality, and the capacity to manage and to reduce disaster risks is even more crucial because storms and other natural events have become more damaging than ever before. Central America and the Caribbean are two of the most vulnerable areas of the globe when it comes to disasters. In December 2020, in the wake of devastating hurricanes, the ministers of foreign affairs in Latin America, the Caribbean, and the European Union stressed the need to promote resilience to climate and disasters risks, and joint strategies for risk reduction and increased preparedness and resilience, emphasizing the importance of access to finance, science, and technology. One concrete result was the establishment in Panama 2022 of a data center for the Copernicus project, which will facilitate the exchange and sharing of information, know-how research, and satellite data for the prevention of climate disasters that will benefit Central America and the Caribbean. Indeed, also COP27 has placed this issue on the forefront of climate change negotiation. We at the EU-LAC Foundation, an international organization formed by the governments of Latin America, the Caribbean, and Europe, have been working on the issue too. We believe that there can be and should be more partnerships and more technical assistance between Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Please, in that sense, let me mention two of the several events organized by the Foundation on the issue this year, international events, by regional events. The EU-LAC Women's International Network held two high-level dialogues on women and climate action in September and October in New York, in the midst of the General Assembly of the United Nations, and also in Spain. Another important event is the policy dialogue on the cooperation between Europe and Central America, focused on disaster risk management and reduction in June of this same year. It was co-organized with Panama in its capacity as temporary presidency of the Central American Integration System. The EU-LAC Foundation is therefore fully supportive of this seminar, which will promote technical exchange and expertise between Slovenian and Caribbean experts. I encourage all the participants to take advantage of this dialogue to identify more initiatives to work together between Europe and the Caribbean. I would like to thank the Slovenian government and all of you for your participation. Enjoy the meetings.
Thank you very much for a nice opening of the EU-LAC Days 2022. Now we will proceed to the introductory remarks from Professor Dr. Lučka Kajfež-Bogataj, who is member of the IPPC, and she comes from the technical faculty of the University of Ljubljana, Slovenia. And she is the member of the IPPC team and also the governmental group for climate change.
Food insecurity that may become more Dear panelists, it's an honor to have the opportunity to address such a distinguished audience. As climatologist, I will focus in my introduction on climate crisis. Small islands are increasingly affected by increased temperature, a larger proportion of the heavy, intense precipitation, tropical cyclones, changing precipitation patterns, and sea level rise. The projected Estimates in sea level rise for 250 in a worst case could be up to 40 centimeters. Tropical cyclones will remain the main driver of flooding in Caribbean Sea. Changes in aridity are expected to impose freshwater stress on many islands. Drought risk projections for Caribbean indicate that at 2 degrees increase in temperature could result in a 60% increase in the number of people projected to experience severe water resources crisis. Increasingly, aridity will also contribute to food insecurity that may become more acute in many places. Coastal cities and rural communities on islands have been already impacted by sea level rise, heavy precipitation events, tropical cyclones, and storm surges. Climate change is also affecting settlements and infrastructure, health and well-being, economies and culture. These changes are of a major concern for small islands, given that a high percentage of their population, infrastructure and economic assets are located in low elevation coastal zones. The vulnerability of communities in islands may exceed adaptation limits well before 2100. The impacts of climate change present serious threats and ability of land to support human life and livelihoods. Climate-related migration is expected to increase, although the drivers and outcomes are not fully understood. Islands present the most urgent need for investments in capacity building and adaptation strategies, but face barriers and constraints which hinder the implementation of adaptation responses. Barriers and constraints arise from government arrangements, financial resources, and human resource capacity. Additionally, institutional and legal systems are often inadequately prepared for managing adaptation strategies, such as large-scale settlement relocation and other planned or autonomous responses to climate risks. Despite the existence of adaptation barriers, several enablers can be used to improve adaptation outcomes and build resilience. These enablers include better governance, legal reforms, improving justice, equity, and gender consideration. Building human resource capacity is also essential, together with increased finance and risk transfer mechanism. Education and awareness programs are important enablers. Increased access to climate information, adequately downscaled climate data can also improve adaptation outcomes and contribute to resilience building. Extremely important is also embedding indigenous knowledge and local knowledge, as well as integrated cultural resources into decision-making. Finally, international cooperation is also essential to identify opportunities at all scales to enhance climate adaptation and enable action towards climate resilient development. I do believe that today's panel will help to identify the climate adaptation needs and different aspects of water domain and discover cooperation potentials in remote sensing and climate data exploitation. So thank you for your attention and thank you for joining the panel.
Thanks to Professor Lučka Kajfež-Bogataj for the introductory remarks. And now we will go to the LAC panel. I would like to invite Tanja Miškova, Ambassador at Large for Water Diplomacy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia. She has a vast experience in water diplomacy and she will tell about relevance of water in international initiatives and cooperation frameworks.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers. To start with, let's start with the fact that the gap between water demand and water availability is increasing, including as a result of climate change, undermining development, and the risk of conflicts over water. This is what motivates Slovenia to engage with the ultimate goal to contribute to a more water-secure world. Now, let me state 4 statements that are a reflection of the 4 priorities of Slovenia's water diplomacy. First, water is a vehicle for cooperation and peace. Second, water, like climate change, does not recognize national borders. Third, climate crisis is essentially a water crisis. And fourth, water runs through all SDGs of the Agenda 2030. And the 2 underlying principles of our water diplomacy are: water is everyone's basic human right, and water is everyone's business. The first one reflects the need for inclusive, fair, and meaningful multi-stakeholder engagement, meaning women, youth, indigenous peoples, etc. And the second one, the need for cross-sectoral approach. Most decisions about water are taken outside the water sector. Water is everywhere, but not necessarily visible. At the level of multilateral cooperation, this scarce resource is missing the necessary political visibility and adequate attention, also because there's no mechanism in place that could ensure high-level, continuous dialogue on global water challenges. There is no COP on water. To contribute to greater visibility and coherence of water efforts inside and outside of the United Nations, to mobilize political will and finance, to bring other sectors on board, we need a system-wide approach to water within the UN and a UN Special Envoy on water. In March next year, the world leaders will gather in New York at the UN Water Conference, only the second in history of the organization. The first one was back in 1977 in Mar del Plata. The world needs this conference to be more than just a talk shop. All of us must bring actionable commitments to the table. All of us must try to convince the non-water sectors, the agriculture, the industry, energy, mining, etc., that water is their business too, and that they too need to take action. Even climate experts, many still refuse to recognize the role of water in climate mitigation, not just adaptation. This, among other things, reflects in climate finance, where resilient water resources management receives only a negligent percentage. The COP in Sharm el-Sheikh was the first one to have water on its agenda, and we need to make sure that it stays on the agenda for future COPs. At the COP27, Secretary General Guterres announced an action plan for the early warnings for all, which aims to cover all planet with early warning systems within 5 years. Currently, 50% of the world population is not protected by multi-hazard early warning systems. Water and climate coalition leaders proposed an initiative to establish a set of global water and climate information services for more comprehensive and connected water data at the global scale to support decision-making on climate change mitigation and adaptation. These are just some of the actions that we need to take to make a more transformative change towards global water and climate security. In the worst natural disasters, water and sanitation infrastructure is often destroyed and water resources polluted, leaving populations extremely exposed. So building resilience is key. Climate-resilient water infrastructure, improved disaster risk management, protection of water resources represent essential preventive actions. But they will not work if construed in silos. They must be developed within integrated planning approaches and reconciled with the objectives of other sectoral policies such as energy, agriculture, food, urban planning. Technological advancements are enablers of improved preventive action. Satellite imaging, remote sensing, artificial intelligence tools can help us predict and prepare better. Slovenian scientists and experts, as you will hear today, developed some interesting solutions in this regard. To conclude, our actions are stronger when we work across borders and regions, sharing data and information, exchanging knowledge and experience, scaling up technological solutions. This is what today's event is all about, and I very much look forward to the presentations and the discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tanja Miškova, for very encouraging introduction. And the water is really very important in international affairs, as water has no limits. I'm delighted that we have also guests from Caribbean, from Trinidad and Tobago. I would like to introduce Dr. Ronald Rupnarin from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. We'll talk about disaster risk resilience for agriculture and environment in the Caribbean. Please, can you share the screen? And I will introduce you in the meantime. So Dr. Ronald Rupnarin is a researcher and academic with a thorough background in disaster risk resilience and sustainable land and water resources management. Presently, Dr. Rupnarin is a lecturer at the Faculty of Food and Agriculture, University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus, and is responsible for teaching and development of courses related to agri-environmental disaster risk and climate resilience. Please tell us what are the initiatives in your country about the disaster risk resilience.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I, really appreciate the collaboration. And I listened to all these speakers before, and I think it's really crucial that we start working together. And I note a lot of the things that we would have been thinking about in terms of our vulnerability and things that I will present today are things that are already said. So I'll bear that in mind and try to go through and highlight as much of the initiatives that I can that are taking place in our region, as well as some of the concerns that we would have highlighted through some assessments in the region as well. So without any delay, I mean, these things have already been known and they have already been spoken about by speakers before me. So I will not go too much into it, but we recognize that there is a change in our climate. We recognize that there is a general issue with respect to rainfall totals, the intensity of rainfalls, and seasonality. And I think one of the key things to point out here is that many of a lot of the focus has always been placed on hydroclimatic disasters in terms of hurricanes. And the fact is that our natural rainfall that we receive in terms of the yearly rainfall through rainfall events, etc., have been causing devastating impacts in many of the islands around the region. So that is also something to consider in the context of climate change, because it's not outright hazard in terms of a hurricane or a tropical cyclone, but general rainfall totals, because of the intensity and the increase and the distribution, has resulted in some damages. So this here again is just pointing out what we already know. And we have seen that over the last 100 years, there has been a consistent increase in temperatures. And all models that have been shown on this diagram here is more or less predicting the same outcome, where you will expect to have a certain amount of increase, maybe between 0.5 and 1 degree Celsius, while we are at here now in 2020. These are also some projections. This is just pulling out one example for Trinidad and Tobago. These things are available for all the islands. And we see that based on the socioeconomic pathways, generally speaking, there will always be an increase in temperature. So you'll have increases in precipitation in some cases, whereas you're seeing, I noted one of the speakers earlier mentioned the whole issue of drought. And most times for Caribbean islands, there's a hyper focus on the other extreme, which is really hurricanes, rainfall, precipitation, flooding, etc. But there are also concerns, particularly for some of the more northern Caribbean islands with respect to droughts. We see maximum temperature is increasing as well in terms of all the projections, as well as minimum temperature. Now, why must we be concerned as SIDS or Caribbean SIDS? The fact is, all of these things are perhaps something that we are all aware of, but I'll just highlight them very quickly. We have limited natural resources and limited space. most of our countries, our populations are located on the coastal zones where there's the majority of development taking place. And we also have high geophysical susceptibility in terms of where we are in the hurricane belt, etc. We also have other issues with volcanic eruptions, potentials for tsunamis, and so on. There's also extreme openness of small economies, which are very sensitive to external shocks. So with the advent of COVID-19, we would have seen food security suffer a major blow in our region, as well as also industry, etc., because of that openness of our markets. Then we have relative isolation from major markets, and also we depend very much on water resources and freshwater supply that are highly sensitive to sea level change. And some of our islands, it should be pointed out, have no surface water. Some of the keys of the smaller islands, they don't have any lakes or rivers. They have to barge water from the mainland to get it across to these smaller keys. Yeah, so that is another concern. This is just to highlight a regional survey that was done by the University of the West Indies in collaboration with the FAO. And we found that persons around the region noted the importance of water resources management. It was not the most popular choice, but it was just below climate smart agriculture. Given the nature of this survey, you would expect agriculture to take the forefront. But there are three things, and these three things were mentioned in conversation that conversations that were had earlier, where it was presented and discussed that the key issues are data and information policies. Climate smart agriculture is an obvious thing when we're looking at food security. And then foremost, water resources management. Now, in terms of key international agreements that we have signed on to, and a couple of things that are important to us, I just want to highlight those very, very quickly as well. It's really the Escazú agreement, which should help in terms of the participatory approaches to decision-making, as well as data-driven decision-making, which is a downfall in our region as well. And then you had the environmental sustainability cluster, which really is meant to minimize vulnerability, improve environmental management and resource protection. And then finally, the Sendai framework, which really speaks about the key thing for me in this one is the Build Back Better approach, which is critical as we try to collaborate with European countries towards improving the things that we are doing here. So every time we go through a disaster, we build back better, and we don't have a situation where we are managing crisis, which is what we usually do. We have to get to the point where we manage risks. Now, the central theme around climate change has always been mitigation and adaptation. First in the region, adaptation is critical. Mitigation, and I mean, we could say this in a very, diplomatic way. First, if we mitigate our carbon emissions to zero, our global contributions are still so limited that it is highly unlikely it will make any difference at that level. So our focus has to be adaptation. And these are just some of the adaptation options that we are looking at in general. So you have protected agriculture, diversified tourism, diversification of livelihood, efficient usage of all resources, and then you have harvesting and water use efficiency, vulnerability mapping for zoning and epidemic alert systems. Then we have to look specifically at things like improved technology in water management. In terms of agriculture, much of our agriculture is rain-fed, which has ripple effects in the sense that you have changes in prices during the course of the seasons. You have issues with what can be planted at certain times because we do not have significant amount of technology involved in our agricultural production. Thankfully, we are moving in a positive direction. We are looking towards wastewater reuse. Trinidad and Tobago, for instance, has just initiated a wastewater reuse standard directed towards agriculture and landscaping uses. And many of the other islands are doing the same thing under a CRU Plus project for wastewater management in the region. We also have to look at protection of agriculture and climate sensitive farming, because many times people do not see the linkage between environment and agriculture. And for me, they are inseparable because they depend on each other and they are so intertwined that it's impossible to separate. So when you have bad agricultural practices, agriculture consumes on average 70% of the water resources that we have. We need to look at increasing the efficiency of this particular sector in order to save water, right? We also need improved land management and land capabilities and suitability analysis and improve research towards decision making. And then you have explore innovative ideas. So you have sargassum, insect farming, and so on, which really are meant to reduce the carbon footprint and increase the efficiency of food production in innovative ways that have less impacts on the environment. This is just highlighting the review of a study that was done by LAC and CRIF in 2021, and it basically highlights in terms of geospatial capacity. It shows what needs to be done in the Caribbean still. So lots of policies are available, but in many countries, this surveyed, I think, 8 countries or 9 countries of the region, but many countries are still lacking, particularly in terms of cartographic standards and process mapping policy and so on. And this is a critical part of representing information going forward and doing digital analysis where people can actually see what is going on. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. Another initiative that has taken place in the Caribbean is digital soil mapping through the FAO. And I'm not going to explain the details of how this happens. Some of you may already know, but this is an initiative that is being used towards, looking at critical elements that contribute towards climate change. So this utilizes legacy data and combines it with what happens if you have local data to try to produce some output maps. And what we would have done is we did one for soil organic carbon. So you kind of understand how much or the distribution or spread of soil organic carbon across the region. This is an example for Trinidad and Tobago. It was done for all the Caribbean islands. Not all of them got to the point of developing the map, but the capacity was built. In addition, last year, we did salinity mapping, which shows the impacts of salinity and sodicity, and highlights the areas that are perhaps most concerning. This is an example for Trinidad and Tobago, and we did it at 2 depths. You did the 0 to 30 centimeters, and then 30 centimeters to 100 centimeters. So these are initiatives that are taking place, and again, this was done for other islands as well. We have drought risk maps that were done in collaboration with research students and the University as well for Trinidad, as well as many other countries in the region, that highlight some of the areas that we should be concerned about and where interventions are required. Similarly, we also have some flood risk maps that were done in the region for Trinidad, as well as other islands have similar mechanisms in place, but these things require more work because the nature of the data that we possess does not allow us to quantitatively assess what is being presented. And one of the key issues here is that lots of focus, particularly with disasters, has been on early warning systems in the region recently, and I will highlight that very quickly as we go forward. But the issue many times is that we know where it's going to flood. We actually understand what is going to happen. The problem that we have is the interventions that need to be put in place to prevent that. So we don't really have significant amounts of deaths resulting from a flood or a hurricane and that sort of thing, but we have significant losses to livelihoods. Yeah. This here is again an updated version of the map that I showed you before, where we did it for community levels. All right, and then we are currently in discussion with our local disaster management agency towards creating a coordination mechanism for flood warnings in Trinidad and Tobago at a community level. So this is showing the other map, but it's the same flood risk map, but it has zeroed in and looking at the community levels. And we could clearly see, I mean, those of you who are familiar with our demographics would understand that much of the concern is based on the developed side of the country, as you're seeing here. A lot of it is on the western side of Trinidad, which is the most populated and has the most development. Yeah. We also explored some critical things in terms of water management, in terms of its ability or, you know, how it affects slope stability and landslides and these sorts of things. So this here is an example of one of my research students who worked on nature-based solutions towards slope stability by measuring moisture content at different depths to inner soil and under different treatments where you're seeing a bare plot, coconut matting, vetiver grass, etc., to see how this grass interacts with the moisture and how it can be linked to slope stability. And we found that vetiver grass was actually a very good nature-based solution by reducing the moisture content by up to 20 to 30% at all depths. Then we have an innovative example here, which I mentioned before. I just wanted to highlight it very quickly. Insect larvae as a protein source for animal feed, which might seem very far-fetched when you're thinking about water conservation, but the mere fact that you have an alternative source of feed for livestock, right, means that you will spend or you will conserve more water in terms of producing the usual or the conventional means of supplying feed for these livestock, yeah. And it also has lower carbon emissions, etc. And finally, the last thing I want to highlight in terms of water management is there's a regional framework now that has been developed for integrated water resources management for the Caribbean community. And you're seeing the vision, mission, and overarching goal here, where the idea is eventually for this policy to guide local or national institutions towards strengthening their own IWRM policies. Some countries have it, some countries don't. They are in different stages of development, and hopefully this can improve our progress to SDG 6 and 651 in particular. So these are just some of the milestones for that particular project. I know we have a very short time, so I wouldn't go through all of that, and the presentation will be available for anyone who would like to see it after. Yeah. And at a personal level, on the university side, we have developed a major in disaster risk resilience for agriculture and the environment. There's a video here, but I will not play it because it may take up too much time. That basically focuses a lot on water resources management as well. And it's a critical area that requires capacity building in the region, and we thought that it would be useful to have a formal program that addresses this. Yeah, I will not play it, so I'll just move on. And I know I rushed through, but I'm trying very much to stick to time, so I've come to the end of my presentation. I thank you all very much for the opportunity. And this picture here is actually a real picture. Two of the vehicles that you're seeing covered there belonged to me. And it was, I think, in 2017 that this flooding event took place. And it was basically because somebody cut the riverbank as a farmer to do his own practices without any approvals. And because of that, it led to an entire area being flooded out that has never flooded in history before. So I end with that, and I show you that I have lived with disasters personally. Yeah. So thank you all very much for the opportunity. And I look forward to any questions or discussions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your interesting talk. It's really, we depend on food and on water. And we can see that without interventions in water use efficiency, we cannot live in the future. So it was very interesting about your wastewater reuse. What do we have, if we have some quick questions, maybe some about, if you tell us about water reuse and experiences in agriculture. Do you have already such experiences, or do you just started to do that?
Well, in Trinidad, for instance, and some of the other islands, we have lots of wastewater treatment plants that have already been set up. And what the issue was that people utilize water for farming, they would have unofficial mechanisms that they use. So let's extract water from a river or a drain without any regulations with respect to how or the quality or the nature of that water. So with the wastewater reuse standard that we're developing now, and in collaboration with this entire Crew Plus project that is taking place in the region, the idea is to formalize wastewater reuse, to encourage wastewater reuse, so that persons will now, instead of illegally extracting water where you don't have any idea what the quality of the water is, etc. They would utilize the outflow or the treated wastewater from the treatment plants, which are very, at least in Trinidad, there's quite a significant amount of output with fairly good quality. And what we did so far is assess the quality of the water for agricultural uses, and it's pretty good. There are no concerns that are directly linked to any health concerns. And the hope now is to take this standard towards implementation. So we are at that stage where we are training farmers to understand the benefits of using wastewater reuse, using wastewater, or treated wastewater, because we don't remove all the nitrogen from it. We leave some of it so it can act as a sort of a natural fertilizer as well. So it's a process, and we're hoping that, maybe in the next 10 years or so, wastewater use is integrated significantly into our system. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you also to be in time, but we have to move on. So I would like to introduce Dr. Arpita Mandal from the University of West Indies, Mona campus from Jamaica. She will talk about water resources management and hydrometeorological hazards of the Caribbean. Please, Dr. Mandal, can you share the screen? And I will introduce you. So Dr. Arpita Mandal is a senior lecturer in hydrology and hydrogeology in the Department of Geography and Geology at the University of the West Indies, Mona, Jamaica. She is also a Jack Senior Lecturer in Engineering Hydrology at the Department of Civil Engineering. She has been teaching here from September 2006. She has vast experiences in water resources, hydrology, hydrological modeling, engineering hydrology, and geophysics. So please, we would like to hear your presentation.
Good afternoon to colleagues in Europe, and good morning to colleagues in the Caribbean.
Good morning and good afternoon. Can you switch to the presentation mode, please?
Okay, sure. Is it okay now?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, so I am going to talk about water resource management and hydromet hazards in the Caribbean, but with special importance to Jamaica, where I am based and where my research is. And the picture you see on the top is this flooding picture is very iconic, unique, not so unique anymore. This is a place called Port Maria in St. Mary in a parish in Jamaica, which gets flooded a lot of times from not even a big hurricane or tropical cyclone, but from a high intensity rainfall. And my colleague, Dr. Rupnaran, just mentioned that in the Caribbean these days, we don't have to wait for a designated or a named storm to hit us. 3-hour, 4-hour continuous rainfall can cause massive flooding. And the other aspect is urbanization, which is in this little picture, where we are having increased urbanization in cities like Kingston and Port of Spain in Trinidad, and which is causing a stress on our water levels and water demands, as a result of which we are having water shortage problem without even a proper drought affecting the island. So I'll try to be quick. So I'll talk about, I won't talk on the sustainable goals because we are all aware that we are talking about goal 6 and the different components of 6.1 to 6.10. I'm going to focus a little bit on challenges in the water sector in the Caribbean, but more on Jamaica and the research that UWI Mona campus does in the island. For the colleagues in Europe and Latin America, just to give you an overview of where we are. So this is a map of the Caribbean, and we are located where this point Jamaica is, and that's where I am. We are directly in the path of the Atlantic hurricane belt. That is why we get a lot of the storms and hurricanes and even their outer bands. Now, what are the challenges in the Caribbean? One is, as outlined by the research done by Climate Studies Group and Taylor in 2018 and later, that we are facing an increased temperature, even a 0.5 to 1 degree rise in temperature is affecting the water resources. Later on, we found out that even amidst high risk for the entire region, the potential impact on individual territories will not be uniform. And this is very important because this brings out the economic difference and the infrastructure difference in different countries. Later we can discuss, because in 2017, Dominica, for example, had a lot of back-to-back hurricanes, and they are still recovering from it. Whereas in Jamaica, some of the infrastructures are a little better. So we may not sustain that level of damage, and with improved management and policies. And the details of further research work is in this in the journal, in this documents. I've just posted the link. We have also done similar studies which have concluded that the Caribbean region, as we mentioned, is very vulnerable, and climate change will exacerbate the existing risk factors. Now, just to give you an outlook on the Caribbean, we are a tropical and warm to hot year-round with 1 or 2 distinct wet seasons. One is in the early season of May and June, the wet, and the later is in the hurricane season, which is from June to November. And the picture on the right shows the number of hurricanes that have affected since 2001, and some of them have retired because of the immense number of damage they have caused. Of special significance is Hurricane Irma in 2017. Temperatures are fairly constant throughout the year, with a range of hardly 3 degrees variation from the eastern to the western Caribbean. Precipitation varies depending on topography, with the windward side of the island receiving more rains than the leeward side. And the top figure is a diagram showing the precipitation outlook for the Caribbean, which comes up from CIMH, which gives you the 3-month projections of areas which can help farmers, especially in their planting of crops. Now, moving back to Jamaica now, Jamaica's rainfall is very much like the rest of the Caribbean, with a bimodal rainfall pattern. And in the figure on the left, you can see the spatial distribution of rainfall as a 30-year mean. We see areas such as the northeast part of the island where you see a dark patch of blue. That's the famous Blue Mountains, the biggest, the highest elevation and the coffee producer of the country, and one of the best coffees in the world. And there we have a lot of rainfall and lot of riverine flooding, whereas the brown and the lower coastal areas are dry areas where pretty much we have a drought. It has a tropical mean maritime climate. The rainfall temperature ranges from 26 to 33. That's the maximum trend. And over the years, from different data sets which we have compiled, we have seen the bimodality in the rainfall pattern is consistent, with 2 peaks in April, May, and then in the later season, which is in the hurricane season. And with reference to the temperatures in Jamaica, this is data from different stations across the island. And we have a similar trend, with the hot months being from July to August, June, July, August, with interior of the island, which is in the parish of Clarendon, as you see, is a little bit cooler than the coastal areas. But overall, it's a similar trend. Now, in water resources of Jamaica, Jamaica gets its water from 2 sources, primarily surface water and groundwater. Groundwater is the main source of water, and if you look at the map on the top right, we have the different aquifers in the island. The yellow one is the limestone aquifer, which occupies approximately 70% of the island and contributes to 80% of the water resource in the island. And the brown is the aquiclude, which is where the surface water comes from, because they are non-porous, non-permeable. And the same, we have put the surface water map just to show the distribution. So surface water and groundwater are your 2 main sources, and rainfall is the primary source of recharge to both the surface and groundwater. Now, we are all talking about climate change and its impacts, and we know and we have felt the impacts in increase in hot, dry spells, increase in intensity and frequency of the hurricanes. So I won't go into all these details now, but some of the impacts that it will affect Jamaica. It will impact its water resources, all the sectors, tourism, agriculture, and health. The climate modeling that has been done for the Caribbean is on global, is using the global climate model. From that, we have reduced it to the regional climate model, and we are now looking at the RCP scenarios. So research has been done, and what research is showing that there is a cyclical trend in the northern, western, eastern, and southern Caribbean. We are overall seeing an increase in temperature. The total rainfall across the region with daily rainfall has gone down, but there is an increase in the frequency and duration of the rainfall events, a noticeable shift in the character of regional rainfall. We have an overall drying or wetting trend. It's not very clear, but the number of dry days between the rain event is increasing. And when it rains, it tends to be heavier. So that is the shift we are seeing. We are also seeing a general tendency for drying in the Caribbean, and drying by end of the century between 25 to 30%. However, we are seeing an increase in the modeled number of increase in the category 4 and 5 hurricane tracks, and with increased frequency and intensity of the storms. These are all results of the climate model that was done for the Caribbean and then data for Jamaica. Now, some of the impact of the resources which we are constantly facing, and the greatest is in the Kingston Basin. Kingston continues to suffer water shortage, and this is because both climate change and increase in urbanization. Kingston is the capital of the island, and its two main resources are the surface water, which you can see over here, Yallas and Hope River, little schematic diagram. Kingston is the one which is in light purple or pink, Kingston and St. Andrew. We have two main rivers feeding a population of 700,000 residing in this island, residing in the parish of Kingston. We have two storage facilities, the Mona Reservoir and the Hermitage Dam, which is shown by these little circles over here. We have an additional supply of water coming into the basin from the adjacent Rio Cobre scheme. And we have some little limited groundwater, because the groundwater in Kingston is highly contaminated from improper sewage treatment. So less rainfall, shortage of rainfall, increase in population, and poor sewage treatment continues to affect Kingston Basin, causing water problems over here. And water from the Rio Cobre is not stored, but is treated and directly supplied to the customers. And this is from 5 to 8 limestone wells in the upper Rio Cobre, which is just the next basin. So we did a study on the Kingston water security and scarcity, a research work that we just finished, and we started earlier and then we stopped and we did again. We are seeing an impact of climate change. We are seeing improper sewage treatment. I'll just give you the highlights of the research work. In the map, you see a lot of dots, and on these dots, you see a lot of yellow dots, green dots, and a lot of blue dots. The blue dots are all discontinued wells, and you see the aquifers. That's the two aquifers, the limestone and the alluvium aquifer. And majority of the population resides in the alluvium aquifer. But majority of the wells, like for example, earlier there was 35 wells, but now it's restricted to only 10 wells. And of these 10 wells, only 4 are pumping water for potable use. So you can imagine the problem we are facing. And this is because of sea level intrusion, sea level rise, slow and saline water intrusion, improper sewage, and over pumping and abstraction due to increase in urbanization, which is what is going to impact all cities across the globe. We had a major drought in 2014-15, where if you can look at the diagram and the geospatial, the extent of the drought, the south coast was severely affected, and the water level in the two main rivers which supply Kingston fell to less than 10% of its discharge. And the sampling of the water quality which we did for these wells, so if you see here, the wells labeled A are alluvium and the wells labeled L are limestone. And only 3 or 4 limestone wells are here, and you see there is a high, this study was done for 2 years for a research work, and we've seen that the chloride levels are significantly higher than the ambient water quality in the wells which are on the top west corner of the basin, and a nitrate which is very high, going up to 27.56 milligram per liter, is in the central part, which is from sewage treatment, because only 30% of Kingston's households are connected to the sewage treatment plant, which is for wastewater treatment. Most houses use soak-away pits and absorption pits. The system is improving now, but it's still a long way to go. So this is the main challenge: the drought, lack of water, lack of resources, short of rainfall, increased urbanization, and improper sewage, which is affecting the water in the Kingston Basin, which is the main basin of the island in terms of demand. Secondly, we did some study on the impact of, I'm showing some case studies on the using the climate model data and trying to see what it will predict the stream flow. So we did this using SWOT, which is an open source tool, but you have to have GIS, and using the 20-kilometer grid box over the island of Jamaica, and using the RCP's precipitation data and predicting the stream flows for the different river systems, which you see on the top map over here. Note the boxes over here, 12 and 13 were used. These are grid boxes. And when we ran the SWOT model, we saw that overall, there is a decrease in the trend in the rainfall as well as in the stream flow. So the rainfall is on the left and the stream flow is on the right. The lower Rio Cobre and upper Rio Cobre, that is going back to this picture over here, we are seeing a declining trend in the rainfall for both all the three RCPs, slight increase in mid-century, but their increase in stream flow from a slight lowering in the all the RCPs, sorry, is showing a lowering, but mostly there is an increase in stream flow from 2015 till end of the century. This research formed a part of the State of the Jamaican Climate, which is an important document for plans and policies in Jamaica. So what I'm trying to say is that the research we do, some of it feeds into planning and policies. And if you look at the right diagram, is also a decrease in stream flow, which means reduced stream flow will mean reduced water availability for irrigation in this basin, and also for supplying water to the other parishes for their potable water supply. And lastly, some of the hydromet hazards in Jamaica. Overall, there is a trend in increase, and this is more in the last decade, part of research work carried out by compiling all the hurricanes that have affected the island. And in the last decade, we have seen, that is 2000 to 2010 and further, a sharp increase in the number of hurricanes, tropical storms, floods, which have affected the island, with the maximum damage of 51 to 450 million, representing 3.4% of the GDP. And the major damage is to the infrastructure sector. Some pictures of flooding. This is all partaken by myself as well as colleagues and from newspaper. And this is a preliminary overall flood hazard map, which we created using GIS data and flood locations, which can be used as a guide for mapping areas where you should not be building to avoid flooding. So this harbor view, the bridge collapsed after Tropical Storm Nicole hit the island. This flooding in Port Maria in 2006 is just from a November rains, no hurricane, no tropical storm, but 1 day of continuous rainfall. And we also tried to model some of these hurricanes by using a user-defined portal which is called SMASH, where you can, it's open source again, where you can select your storm from the different storms which we uploaded, mainly Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Ivan, Katrina, and Dean. So the user selects the storm, the user selects the speed and focuses the track, and then you can run the model. When you run the model, the storm moves over the island, and you can get the rainfall for the different grid boxes across the island. And we used it as a case study for the Hope River watershed. Why? Because the Hope River watershed is always getting impacted by flooding, as you see in the two pictures. So this can be used as an early warning system, much improvement of data, of course. So the left is the hydrological model, which we prepared, and we simulated the flow at two junctions, A and B, which are just upstream of the flood locations. So this is the rainfall intensity at track 1 and track 2, different tracks at different speed. And what we found is that if you have a faster speed hurricane, you have a shorter lag time to the peak flow. So you can aware people that, okay, if the storm is coming at 25 kilometers per hour, you have 10 minutes, 10 hours to peak flow at this particular location. So you have this much time to prepare for evacuation. And this is also research work which has been published. And lastly, I'll end with the impact study we did on the same watershed using rainfall from the 1.5, 2 and 2.5 change in temperature and what is its impact. So we used the climate model data and looked at how a 1.5 change and a 2 and a 2.5 change in temperature. So different climate data sets which were used from the climate statistical downscaling of the climate model was used in the hydrological model, and we used on the same watershed, and we found that it was a combined approach of hydrological and hydraulic model. We tried to estimate peak flows at the same outlets as a case study. Later, this can be expanded to other areas in the Caribbean as well as in Jamaica for EWS, early warning system, because that is what we need to know now. Okay, how long will it take for people to evacuate? Because flooding will remain a crisis. And so these are the spots where the outlets are the locations which are the junctions of the rivers, and these are just upstream of where the flooding had taken place. So with that, we saw that even with a 1.5, 2 and 2.5, there is the same concern with the 2-degree increase in temperature causing a slight increase in the inundation depth going up to 6 meters. And from the picture, if you look here, these houses are on the riverbed, some of these houses. So that is another challenge we have in the Jamaica, that people are building where they should not be building. So I hope I tried to stick to the time, and what we are trying to see is that all the climate projections are showing an increase in peak flows for the hydrological and hydraulic models, and the flood risk will increase in the immediate future. Flooding will affect infrastructures. We have to ensure proper flood control measures, early warning systems, Gabion baskets, and we need to implement a no-build zone. We have policies, we have plans, but implementation is what is lacking. There are certain challenges in this modeling, which is lack of geospatial data, lack of adequate automated weather stations for rainfall intensity, and lack of freely available high-resolution DEM. So this is what my research covers, and thanks to the partners, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arpita Mandal. I'm sorry that actually we used all time, therefore I will invite João Pita Costa from the International Research Center of Artificial Intelligence under auspices of UNESCO, from the Jožef Stefan Institute from Slovenia, to tell us about observing and exploring water events through artificial intelligence. Please share your screen.
Yes. Yeah. I guess I see my screen now.
Dr. João has a PhD in mathematics from the University of Ljubljana, and he worked a lot in topographical data analysis at the Institute of Jožef Stefan, and we are eager to hear about this observatory. Please.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the inspiring talks and discussions from our fellow panelists that were just prior to me, and the great work that they are developing. My name is João Pita Costa, originally from Portugal, a country that unfortunately is also slowly suffering from climate change. And I'm presenting you here a new tool, AI-based, based on artificial intelligence, to tackle some of these problems. And this year, particularly, it was quite in the news, the different, let's say, aspects and perspectives all across Europe on water. So the European perspective of water was quite present. was quite present on the discussions, was quite present on many of the points and priorities that have been changing. We've seen a lot of things that we were not expecting to see so fast, and so in fact this is something that also moved in a way or reprioritize or refocus certain perspectives, and the one that I'm going to talk about is one of them. So we are establishing an SDG observatory at the International Research Center of Artificial Intelligence at the auspices of UNESCO. It will address differently, but it will address all SDGs, including SDG 6 on water, and we are also discussing and preparing and presenting already some achievements and technologies on the climate action SDG 13, where we were that we presented also in the UN Youth Changemakers. We're discussing with the Planeteers and so on. So many that there's a big reception and a big emphasis on climate action, but there's also, and that's where I think this really fits here, a very important perspective on how water and the knowledge on water and the knowledge on water management and water resources can bring this perspective forwards. And so the IRCAI SDG Observatory aims to bring this perspective of the International Research Center on improved research on artificial intelligence, development towards the Sustainable Development Goals, training and cooperation across research centers, north-north, north-south, promotion of measures of that will bring us to better knowledge, better understanding, better functionality, and help or support different audiences in bringing this knowledge. So we're talking here, of course, about water management utilities that take a key role in this procedure. We work directly, for example, with Alicante in Spain, in their water center of excellence, with regional authorities like the Carouge municipality, that struggle to find the best fit approaches to bring in, and of course also opening the door to educational institutions, research institutions, and to the general population to better knowledge, not only local knowledge but global knowledge for a better action, let's say. And so across we use text mining, advanced text mining technologies and machine learning technologies in general, most of them in-house made, to understand to deal with open data that is provided from different institutions and from either global agencies like the World Bank or open data institutions from regions, to provide these capabilities of making that data available, data on water stress level, on falling water, on water usage, and be able to provide the user with interactive data visualization that help to understand better relations, both at global level, comparing different countries, different global regions, but also at local level to promote data-driven evidence-based decision making and policy making at local, at regional level, at national levels, and we are providing this data differently to this. We are also because one good part of our technology is text-based. There's a lot that we can extract, a lot of insight and information that we can extract from news, from science. So looking at the news, we are ingesting, I think, more than 100,000 articles per day. We're able to identify entities, relate those entities, relate aspects of water topics, examples of water management, new solutions to be, for example, or reuse of water, and the public opinion, for example, on the reuse of water, to better understand those aspects, those user stories, those experiences, and drive best practices. We have more than 10 years of historical data collected, so we can also understand the different momentums of certain events, relate events that happened in other parts of the world that are maybe similar, but and overcome language barriers and so on. So this is definitely something that we can then relate with alerts and input and real-time input from social media, for example, with Twitter, which we had several research agreements, and integrate into a knowledge from this media that is complemented with the scientific research. The world is more and more on the direction of an open research perspective. We have in our system more than 126 million published articles from the Microsoft Academic Graph, and based on the text mining technologies, we are able to understand trends and across time on research. For example, the main topics that relate with climate change, and be able to go further towards the exploration of how certain extreme events are treated. What are the measures? What are the good methodologies for that are published on wastewater management? What are the technological patents that are available, so that we also have a technological landscape overview and help water utilities, regional authorities to faster grab this information and link it to knowledge, for example, on the media and so on, and have first signals that come from this information that is already accessible. So the key here is not only having this single window views on either indicators or social media, but be able to go and see the complement between each other. So when we have an example of a flood, we can understand, and we can look at the overall indicators, different indicators that might relate with this, relate them with the knowledge that we get from social media and news, and make some forecasts, that long-term forecasts that can help us understand a bit better how certain environmental parameters can go towards some trends in time. water contamination in the context of, our colleagues were also mentioning, in the context of post-effects of floods, but also in the context of the protection of water resources. What are the best practices that we can take from other examples? What is the knowledge that we can get, for example, from the PubMed Medline data sets that can bring us from the science perspective good examples, and so on. And to close to final, I would like to also mention that we've been doing quite some work lately on trying to explore different environmental parameters, measurable parameters, on some partners that we've been working with, on weather, humidity, water levels, water temperature, to try to understand not only on a long term what can be trends for this, to explore through Markov chain processes the states and the relation of states that are derived from that data, and that can bring us different perspectives from the way that these parameters and these environmental conditionings are changing, and compare them with news and science and the insights that we make available and we make measurable from those texts and that text data sets that we get, to be able to complement at a certain level, complement also the contribution to improve indicators, and also to measure new indicators that can make sense and can be considered, can be relevant for a global understanding and local understanding of towards the water climate change preparedness from the water perspective.
Thank you very much for interesting exploring water events through artificial intelligence. We will make discussion at the end, and now I would like to introduce Professor Dr. Tomaž Rodić from the Slovenian Center of Excellence for Space Science and Technologies. He will talk about NEMO HD satellite for scanning of river basins and seaflows. So we are coming from theory to the data gathering.
Well, thank you. I would like to show you a NEMO HD microsatellite mission that combines not only the small satellite but also ground station and data processing procedures. We have launched that mission to space a little bit more than 2 years ago, and the satellite is actually, as you will see in this small video, a very agile satellite that can follow river basin and coastal areas, and in this way we can gather data, precise data over the river basins. This way we can then connect ecosystems and so on. So what I would like to stress here is that, yes, what you have seen is that we follow this, but each of the images that we collect is actually containing multispectral data about the quality of water, the agriculture around the river basin, and as well as urban areas, this river discharge of Solča River. And we were lucky that European Space Agency, based on our results, awarded us a river basin challenge in Ionian, Adriatic, Danube and Alpine regions. And here you can see several technology demonstrations areas where we would like to showcase how our technologies work. And I'm also proud to say that we actually developed the special techniques where we can follow the river basin. This is a Sava River, approximately 1,000 kilometers long. And even with a small satellite, we can scan theoretically the river basin in one go, which means that we can speed up analysis almost by 50 to 100 times. So far we did that in 5 stretches, but By the end of the project, I think we will minimize this to 2 or maybe even just one single stretch. As indicated here, for example, we have a lot of images collected from Sava River following the river path, which goes through many main cities in the transborder areas, including Ljubljana of Slovenia, Zagreb in Croatia. This is the image of Zagreb, for example, and then also all the way down to the discharge to Belgrade. And there's some different analysis indicated here. Of course, you can, from multispectral data, you can squeeze out a lot of valuable information about the river basins. I'm also proud to say that this data is being now integrated into the Sentinel Hub, which is a European Earth observation system in the program of Copernicus. So you can actually manipulate the data acquired by NemoHD in the same way as they come from Sentinels. And this allows us then to monitor many different phenomena in macro, micro, meso, and even local levels, all the way down to individual farms, if you wish, or vineyards. And we have shown that as well. And I'm also very happy that successful results that we produced are now actually being transferred to India, to Ganga River Basin, for cleaning the Ganga River. And we are just, as we speak, actually now joining initiative to make twinning of rivers, Ganga with Mekong in Cambodia, Amazon River in Brazil, and Tame in UK. And here we will use the same technology addressing river basin problems in different river basins, which are actually quite specific. But we will use the same satellite technologies to address either problems related to food, water, climate, and energy. And also we can look into the urban area, natural disasters, as well as maritime transport. Considering water, actually satellite data can also give you some indicators about water quality, such as sediments, chlorophyll, turbidity, temperature, and plastics. And when we do this from scientific and technological point of view, it's often quite difficult to disseminate this knowledge that we gather into wider public. And actually, I must tell you that what we are developing as well is to reach broader audience. We are developing even arts communication strategies using symbolic language of art to sensitize general public about the environmental problems. This is especially critical in our neighborhood. Some Bosnian River actually have pollution levels as you indicate here. We can monitor this and in Sava Commission there are some actions for cleaning and we are monitoring this from space as well. What I would like to stress now is these are actually the advantages of our satellites considering its agility and following the river path, but there is one more major advantage here, that we can use video. This is again, many of you are acquainted with Sentinel-2 satellites, and this is, for example, image of Frankfurt Airport. If we zoom in, this is the details provided by European satellite, and when you look with our satellite, you can see that in smaller areas they produce much more detail because of the spatial resolution. But actually what we do as well is we can take over certain areas also video accumulating actually the event. So you can even observe traffic, both airplanes taxiing, and here you can see the cars moving on the motorway next to the airport. We were even very happy to manage to image from space taking off on an aircraft. We are monitoring sometimes the areas related to gold mines. This is the Australian case. And what we can do here, we can also monitor some analytic about economic activity as well as environmental impacts of the mining in the area. Considering going back to water again, our satellite has the resolutions that are good enough to monitor also small boats for maritime application. This is a small marina in Ceres Island where you can see that we can even see boats that are less than 10 meters. And we can also in tourist season then observe impacts of boats in in Adriatic Sea as well as elsewhere, if you want any place in the earth. This year, Slovenia was affected by drought, but not only drought. We had severe forest fires. They were observed from our satellite as well, and multispectral images were helpful to identify the amount of damage, as well as actually the animation of our overflight indicates that we were even able to monitor and seek for the areas from space that were actually damaged by fire. And looking at the video, we found the solutions then and did also multispectral images of the area. So you can actually scan not only river basin, but also during natural disasters to see from space what are the areas. So maybe to summarize the advantages of our satellite, we have video and multispectral data available with precise pointing and agile tracking. Unfortunately, I didn't have much time to tell you about the transportable ground stations that can be delivered to any part of the world, where you can then take advantage of low latency and real-time acquisitions. And that our satellite is so agile, but also has different payloads which can be activated at different levels. So we call it almost as a kind of Swiss Army knife for ecological problems. I mentioned before that we are trying to communicate with art, science, and technology. We did that very successfully, even presenting the first results to our Prime Minister. But we want to go much further there, and we are developing, as I said, techniques where we could actually use a totem for humanity that would actually display the indicators about the web of life in the river and basins all around the cross, and the statue itself can communicate with satellites and gather the data and display it to general public. And actually we are already this is not only an idea, the first will be installed now in Slovenia, measuring the electric power distribution, but we would like to do that also for the quality of water, biodiversity, and so on. So I'm running out of time. I just wanted to give you a brief indication about the stories that we are making, but yes, we are very much willing to transfer all the technologies that we are using and exercising in our macro areas also to Caribbean. We could offer you this as educational tools, support of your research, as well as actually solving your specific environmental problem and tailor-make applications for you. So be welcome to use our satellite as yours if you wish, collaborating with us, and we'll be happy to support you because we still have free capacities there in the Caribbean area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Rodic. It's really challenging, and we can have a lot of information from these satellites. So for the data capturing is very important. We have some questions in chat, but I would like to announce that we will have a discussion and conclusions session at the end. So thank you. I now invite Ms. Urška Kušar from the Slovenian Water Agency to tell us a little bit more about the data organization. This is the Water Atlas of Slovenia, public data infrastructure for water management. Urška Kušar is a GIS analyst and works at Slovenian Water Agency, and she will present the Water Atlas as a tool for water management. Please.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to present you with an example of public data infrastructure that is widely used in water management in Slovenia. I work in Slovenian Water Agency, which is a public institution, part of the Slovenian Ministry of the Environment and Spatial Planning, and the agency performs professional, administrative and development tasks with the aim of integrated water management. And of course, important part of this is involved collecting, managing and distributing also the data about the water or relevant water. The practice has shown that one of the most important tools to communicate water management related facts and issues is our spatial data viewer, the Water Atlas. The Water Atlas is quite simple data viewer, but it's a kind of display window to many underlying data sets and databases, which are in a kind end results of many processes in the field of water management in Slovenia, where the data are collected. Data viewer is structured quite simply with overlying layers that are organized in data teams that can be switched on and off. It covers the complete Slovenian territory, has the basic functions for zooming from national to very large local scales, has measuring tools, geolocators, and so on. And of course, the biggest value of the Water Atlas is the data that it presents. Let me present a few examples. The baseline layer for water management is hydrography. Slovenia has a dense watercourse network with over 41 kilometers of total length. This might sound quite a lot, but please pay attention to the width, the size of the water courses that are included in this figure. Data for the actual Slovenian hydrography layer has been captured with the benefit of using a remote sensing campaign that took place in Slovenia in 2014 of laser scanning, LiDAR, which covered the whole Slovenian territory and resulted also with a quite detailed terrain model. This enabled us not only to capture and improve the positioning of water courses, reservoirs, still water bodies, but also to capture smaller, previously undelineated water bodies, especially those that were undetected because they were hidden behind the tree canopy of the aero photos. And we captured all of them in the 3D. The terrain model with the resolution of 1 meter enabled us to capture also another layer that we called waterland. Waterland is a concept that was present in Slovenian legislation, but its actual delineation showed its true value. Waterland is land use area. The area that is dedicated to water. That means moving away from the linear representation of the water course to the entire area between the riverbanks, where water needs to have space to occupy in the case of storm water. Another very popular data set in the Water Atlas are all data connected to drinking water, means drinking water protection areas and water rights. 17% of Slovenia's area is protected as drinking water protection zone, depending on the time that potential pollutant in the spill would reach a water extraction point for drinking water. Water rights are the rights for use of water that exceeds the general water use and are granted in a form of water permit or water concession. And all the data about each permit, that means the type of the permit, permitted abstraction, quantity, ID of the actual formal act, along with the location, is available at any time in our spatial data viewer. Water consumption in Slovenia presents a relatively small portion of the annual gross water outflow from the country. But as we heard before, there are shortages of water in Slovenia, which is indicating that it's all about distribution in time and space for the water. And maybe just a small remark on the administrative burden, because I'm coming from administrative body. 95% of population in Slovenia is supplied by public drinking water supply, which is covered by a little more than 800 water permits. And double that amount are covered with, of the permits are managed in our system for the smaller water supplies. And of course, our water atlas also includes layers for controlling and reducing flood risks. Layers include coverage and flow directions of past flood events, as well as modeled flood risk areas based on predicted reach depth and flood water return periods. As well, and it's quite important for the management, general classification layer, which is used directly in the decision-making processes. And one layer that is particularly interested for investment of the management of connecting with the flood risks is areas of significant impact of flood layers, which is produced in an excessive process which is based on the expert assessment, but further developed in the consultation process of different public and political layers. And this part of National Flood Risk Management Plan. Water Atlas with Water Cadastre is the essential tool for administrative procedures, for example, for building permits and spatial planning. Presented here is the overview of the flood risk areas, overlay with land cadastre parcels, and basement from a photo campaign. Around 20,000 acts called water consent are considered annually as part of building permits procedures, and more than 1,000 procedures connected to spatial planning. That means that Water Atlas is essential to implement the water flood protection measures, especially for informing habitants, investors, planners, local officials, and politicians about flood risk in particular area. And of course, to promote appropriate land use, agricultural and land management, and forest management. And now my favorite part, managing the Water Atlas. As it seemed very simple data viewer, there was a lot of experience and a lot of mistakes and a lot of discussions that was needed for its existence. The management authority of the Water Atlas is the Slovenian Water Agency. The basic database which stores water-related data is the Water Cadastre database, and this is stored in the infrastructure of the Public Administration Ministry. This enables us high level of security, but also to exploit the capability of the whole system, which means also managing simultaneously the data viewer, always observing the distribution data by direct downloads or web services. Our older brother is the Atlas of the Environment, managed by the Environmental Agency, which was first published already more than 20 years ago. And data flows are still strongly connected with data procedures. Many of our data sets are produced as official data sets, endorsed by ministry, government, or by parliament. And some of them are based on the requirement of European legislation, such as Water Framework Directive or Floods Directive. So we can use the system to directly test their suitability and the necessary communication and reporting platform. And this is following the goal of our goal of interoperability. It was essential to limit ourselves in publishing to publish just relevant layers. And the criteria for relevancy are discussed over and over again and are changing over time. We learned that publishing too many data and data do not have sufficient quality and methodological coherence can cause confusion and bad decisions. One of the simple checks to see whether we are comfortable publishing data or not is how comfortable we are with writing the metadata. If we know who is the author of the data, who is administrator, who is owner, who can be held accountable, then the data and what is the methodology behind the data, then this is a signal that the data are otherwise some additional efforts has to be made. So I would like to conclude with the observation that probably any manager of data information system experience. The critical part of any information system are people who manage it and their organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting organization of data because we all have many data, but to organize it into the nice system, it's not so easy. Thank you very much. I would like to invite Professor Dr. Primož Banovec from the Faculty of Civil and Geodetic Engineering of the University of Ljubljana to talk about flood management and flood risk reduction system. Dr. Primož Banovec has a vast experience in the field of drinking water supply systems, flood management, accidental water pollution, and civil protection mechanisms as disaster management. So please.
Thank you very much. Dear guests, working now in different time zones, so we are getting late and you're getting hungry probably, but it's a joint experience and it's really nice to be here. So I'll start with some challenging pictures of floods, and this is a picture from neighboring Zagreb, close to Slovenia, and the date is 1923. And again, the same picture or some similar picture of big cities, it's 1964. There were those worst floods in the Zagreb history, and that was Ljubljana, and actually the flood event of 2014 was quite a serious flood event in the zone with approximately 200 casualties. And from all these pictures, we can see that floods is something that is here to stay. And basically, every generation is kind of reinventing floods. And I will start with a challenging statement. Challenging. Don't blame it on the climate change, because the floods are here to stay, and they were here, and they will be here. And sometimes the climate change are a very good excuse to say, oh yes, it's climate change, we cannot do much about it. So it's agreed among the professors, I think, I talked to many of them in the region, that too many times when we are talking about the floods, at least in the region, I would say, we are kind of have to underline, don't blame it on the climate change, because all other components of the flood management system are affecting these floods. And as we see from the pictures, there were floods before anybody was really measuring, observing, kind of post-late industrial area zone. And now we are still confronted by the floods. Nevertheless, especially the short concentration times are somehow recognized in Slovenia and in the regions to be heavily impacted by the climate change, which means the precipitation of up to 1 day is quite observed, or shorter periods are really notably changing the statistics. So what is another picture regarding the floods? That's the picture from this year. Is in Slovenia, the floods are not only the floods as we have seen before, flooding from the rivers and so, but it's several times. Slovenia is a very mountainous country, related to heavy erosion process, debris flows even, and they are in a way even more challenging because they are somehow less predictable and really difficult to manage. So I will start with my experience, what to address regarding the floods and how to approach, how to understand them. And I think, listening carefully all the presentations from before, that we are all talking the same language, and that we have to continue this work in talking the same language to address this complexity in adequate manner. So first, I would like to really start is the topography and geology, of course. So whenever somebody asks me from any country where I'm working, so I work in several countries regarding flood management, is do you have the LiDAR DTM high resolution publicly available? And the answer is sometimes positive, sometimes negative, but this is experience also from the United States after the Katrina and New Orleans disaster. They make a Senate hearing and they discuss what is wrong, what should we do about the floods? And the expert says in 3 words, give us LiDAR. If there is no LiDAR, we cannot really talk floods. And that's generally agreed. And Slovenia has 2014 LiDAR data. The resolution is approximately 5 to 7 points per square meter. It's an extremely high resolution. It's covering the entire territory of Slovenia. And I would really once stress that the LiDAR data are essential. And it's very also important that they are made public. Because if they are not made public, not everybody is using the LiDAR data, and then this educational and spread out experience of the floods management is not really reaching the entire target population. So this is Slovenia. We call it a little bit in the chicken, so it has a beak, you see on one side. It's about twice the size of Jamaica. I have checked that. And 4 times the Trinidad, I think, and our population is slightly above 2 million. So somehow we are ranging in the same dimension. Nevertheless, we are not an island, and we'll see that later. And for what we see here is this green and blue coloring is high resolution detailed model, and we can use it also. We have small portion of the seaside, about 40 kilometers, and today's picture was that the sea was already flooding again our port cities, and of course with this LiDAR data you can also in very much detail understand, predict also the future effects of the sea level rise. So LiDAR extremely important. The next component which is extremely important is precipitation and of course climate change monitoring and observation. So this is very typical example of one climatological station. In Slovenia we have good coverage with the radar, weather radars. We have good hydrological monitoring network, and which is part of the broader transboundary multilateral network, for example, for the Sava River Basin, for which also joint prognosis of discharges are being made and flood alert data. So we were talking also, or some discussions before me, they were talking about the alerting protocols, about the forecasting models, and this is really essential. And what is also essential to make the duration, intensity, and frequency curves, so-called EDF curves, maintained, and this is maintained in Slovenia by our National Hydrometeorological Agency, which is also one of the important features which the countries should have in order to understand how these curves, also observed in the short-term precipitation events, are gradually actually changing. The next component is vulnerability and land use. We were also talking about the changes of land use, and actually the changes of land use are contributing more to the flood risk than the climate change. Depends on the area, of course. So what is interesting and what we are always observing, we have Austro-Hungarian maps, which started from the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, which means they are kind of 200 years old. And we can understand how the land use has changed for the last 200 years, which is very important information in order to understand what is going on and why the people are flooded. And of course, people are flooded usually because there is more people in the flood-prone zones. So usually then we are using a good bunch of the public cadastral data, which is public cadastral of the building, public cadastral on the land use, and so on. And we also calculate the expected annual flood damage in order to optimize the measures taken to reduce floods. Next, point 4, so obviously we are going in some kind of circle, is education and knowledge. This shouldn't be underestimated, and we are part of educational processes. On this picture, we are observing more or less like my students, and it is, of course, very important to address with the education also the lifelong education, which means also the micro certificates for the education. And sometimes, at least it was stated in one project, that political leaders are not really prone to education in this matter. So they know everything because they're already elected, and if you are elected, you already are kind of smart. Well, I would discuss about that. So, education and knowledge on all levels, all the time. Infrastructure. In Slovenia, this is typical mountain Slovenia, we actually can live in our mountains because on one course I said our rivers and creeks are actually nailed to the mountains. Well, it's true. So you see from the picture, if you don't nail the rivers and creeks to the mountains, you cannot live in Slovenia. You have to build it and maintain it, and it has to be made functional all the time. So similar is the situation from the coastline. And actually, if you don't nail the coastline to the current position, and this is one of the major challenges, you cannot really have the coastline for sure for the very near future, because one of the major challenges related to climate change is actually sea level rise. And it is like a train which is coming quite predictably high. And of course, this infrastructure, I'm also talking about predictive maintenance. It's not only infrastructure, it has to be well maintained in order to be ready for the return time period events, and that we can really rely on this infrastructure to really function when and where it should function. So it's really important. So this is my close part work. Basically, me and my team, we are heavily involved in the modeling and the forecasting, two-dimensional, even three-dimensional models, sometimes with sediment transport, sometimes with pollution transport. So the modeling of the current situation, modeling of the future situation with some measures, and sometimes I still need to show this picture. We have to develop physical models because there are no some specific answers, especially regarding when we are talking about the effects of the dead load transport. Dead load transport is somehow still a mystery, so there are sometimes, in very rare cases, also physical models developed. Legal framework. This book, we can read, we are talking about the Constitution of the Republic of Slovenia, and we know that our constitutions are governing acts which are of extreme importance, and the key components of our legal systems are written in the Constitution. But of course, this Constitution then defines like Water Act, Construction Act, Environment Protection Act, Nature Protection Act, Special Planning Act, and there are several more legislational bodies, and also bylaws, technical guidance documents, decrees, and without a somehow coherent legal framework, you cannot manage water. I really like to stress here that the water management was already mentioned in the Hammurabi Act, which is the oldest known legal act written in these clay tables, and it's really interesting to read it. I would really recommend everybody to read water components of the Hammurabi Act, because it's something like, if you don't maintain your dike, then you have to pay for the damage. If you cannot pay for the damage, you and your family will be sold on the market. Well, it's not really an act which is suitable for this century, but it's somehow important that I think it's 6,000 years old. And it is first act, and it shows the importance of the legal framing of the water management, of course also of the flood management. Finance. This is again another question, how to resolve the financing issue, how to make the finances stable, independent from the day-to-day policy, because sometimes actually I was talking with the Dutch experts, they said, yeah, well, you know, where there comes a crisis, they want to take us the money for the maintenance of the dikes, and we always have to fight. And I asked them, but you're Dutch, you depend on the dikes, you cannot survive. Yes, you know, it's true, but sometimes the politics actually forgets about it, And we actually have to fight to have a stable financing framework in order to perform all the tasks. Organization and governance. Well, this is another very important, slightly related, of course, to the legal framework, but we can talk about this again for hours probably. But Slovenia is actually having good bilateral and multilateral cooperation with neighboring countries, with the operative commissions on the water management, resolving all the issues with our neighboring countries, but we have to resolve also the issues between the state, regions and local communities. You have to resolve the issues between the Water Ministry, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Emergency and different agencies. So it's all permanent kind of negotiation among all the types of organizations, levels of government, ministries, which has to be performed in somehow successful way in order to address the complexity of the flood management and water management as it should be. So it's related also to the planning, being aware of the current status and what we want actually to achieve realistically. To set those planning framework, European Union is defining this to have a 6-year operational period to define what we are planning to do in the next 6 years to improve the current status, and again 6 years, and again 6 years. This is closely related to the public participation and very magic word, water democracy. We actually have to involve the people to participate in the water democracy, to know what we are doing, how we are doing it, how they can contribute to everything, and to really involve it. And this is one of the really big challenges if we want to address the flood management. It's occurred several times that engineers, technicians have developed really wonderful flood protection projects, and then suddenly there was an uprise of locals which didn't understand, they were not involved in the entire process, and then really good projects, or quite good projects, have stopped suddenly, and the involvement of the public is requested, is necessary also due to changed awareness of the population regarding different public important topics. So we have social networks, people discuss, develop different ideas. So we have to address it and recognize this as important. Response framework has to be ready if disasters happen. And of course, we have to have these equipped firefighters and emergency framework so they can help to the people, but also to develop supporting structure, which is in Slovenia called the Incident Command System, National Incident Command System, Multi-Agency Coordination System. Actually, these words are taken as a standard for all the response framework units all over the world using the United States approach of the ICS. The recovery could be bad, which means it is actually very bad if we don't plan for the recovery and we let the population to live in the tents and don't have a suitable recovery framework. Of course, good recovery frameworks enable people to restore the infrastructure, to restore their life back, and to continue so the society can prosper. So this is also part of the recovery, is part of the water management complexity. Supervision, I like to put that, we are obviously closing to the end of my presentation, because all these processes have to be supervised. Unsupervised processes are actually not processes, they are chaotic processes. So we have to supervise finance, supervise planning, supervise education, supervise infrastructure, supervise. And actually I'm by background civil engineer, and civil engineering is all about supervision of the complex system so we can achieve the targets. And the last, and I really like, we didn't plan for that, I put for the last people. Without people you cannot do anything. And actually we need to have all this complexity of these 14, I brought the priority areas, but we need people of all kinds, specialities, participative process, everything, because water management and flood management, yeah, it sounds it's about water, it sounds it's about the geography, it sounds about infrastructure, but it is actually all about the people, because people can put everything together, finance it, work it, supervise it, monitoring, model it. So you need to understand that people are in the center of this complexity. So All these 14 priority areas, they are, each and every one of them is important. So if I started with LIDAR, you cannot do nothing with the LIDAR, you can do nothing without people, you can do nothing with the finance, with nothing with the recovery system. If you don't have educational system set in place, nobody knows anything. So actually it is important to follow all, and probably some even more, which are not mentioned here, in order to address this complexity. And the question is, of course, when I confront and support the countries in this development, well, can you perform some kind of benchmarking? What are your strong points in these areas? What are your weaknesses? And well, every country has to work on the weaknesses in order to gradually approach, this is work of generation, towards the flood risk reduction, and somehow approach to the reality which is in the favor of all our people for which we are working for. So, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Barnett, for enlightening us and depicting us this complexity of the flood management. I would like to invite Assistant Professor Tina Ederšek from the National Institute of Biology, Slovenia. She will speak about freshwater biorisk detection in the era of climate change. Tina Ederšek is Doctor of Biological and Biotechnical Sciences, and she is a Senior Research Associate at the National Institute of Biology, and main research area is the ecology of algae and cyanobacteria. Please.
Thank you. Also a warm hello from my side, and thank you, the organizer, for this opportunity. I will tell you something about biological risk, which is connected to freshwaters. At this presentation, I will focus only on 3 points, and I would like to explain that at the National Institute of Biology, we study also some potential approaches for this freshwater biorisk detection. First, I will speak about detection methods for detecting cyanobacteria in freshwaters. Then I will go shortly to citizen science approach, which we used recently to enhance this knowledge about bloom occurrence and to prepare the risk detection strategy. And the third one will be toxicological profiles, because we are also investigating what these toxins do to humans. So let's go to point 2.1. For those of you who haven't heard before, cyanobacteria, they are also called blue-green algae. They are prokaryotic organisms that carry out oxygenic photosynthesis, and they produce a wide variety of different substances, and some of them, only some of them, are called cyanotoxins because they are toxic to higher organisms. Not all are toxic and harmful, but they are extremely important part of nature, and it's because of them we breathe oxygen on Earth today. So they are not dangerous, but some of them, they are. The problem may arise when they reproduce excessively. It's called cyanoblooming. It can be on surface or it can be also at certain depth. And the main question is the blooming a problem or a symptom of bad freshwater management? And the consequences of such blooms and blooms with cyanotoxins are 3. They crowd out other organisms, and they drastically reduce the biodiversity, and they increase the turbidity very much. The second is that after this bloom lies, we get high concentration of bacteria, and these bacteria spend all the oxygen, and there is no oxygen for other organisms. And for example, here on photo you see a dead fish. It's not because of toxins, it's because of oxygen. But in addition to that, these blooms may contain also toxins, which are very harmful to animals and humans. They pose risk as for cancer and for neurodegenerative illness. And main factors enhancing this phenomena are slow flowing waters and high temperatures and nutrients. These are main 3 factors. Also there are other factors, but these 3 are the dominant. And such blooming did greatly threaten the functioning of inland water ecosystems. And the future doesn't seem bright because you can easily imagine that slow flow and high temperature are here already with the climate change. And I will not go into details how climate change affects the fresh waters and primary producers. It can be algae or cyanobacteria. They're very similar. There are many factors which can, on one hand, the drought, and on the other hand, heavy rain and so on. But I would just like to stress out that fresh waters are among the most endangered habitats due to these higher temperatures and changing precipitation patterns. And of course, together with nutrients, this is a paradise for cyanobacteria. And we detect this cyanobacteria paradise with microscopy. It's a traditional method. With molecular methods, we do it with qPCR and new generation sequencing. We do this recently also with fluorimetric methods on site. And we would like to start with Earth observation because we got a national project on this, and we would like to elaborate and include also Earth observation in this biorisk detection. We focus mainly on surface water, but toxic species can be found also in marine or terrestrial environments. So it's a global problem, not only a Slovenian problem. So I have explained why it's important to know the occurrence, so that's why we developed an online platform called CyanoSlow, and we use the citizen science approach. With this, we wanted to enhance the knowledge and awareness that people would know what this means, and we wanted to inform them where these toxic blooms are present, and we will also advise citizens how to reduce exposure if it's needed. And we also want to gather data to prepare this freshwater risk detection strategy, because this monitoring of cyano blooming is not included in national monitoring of freshwater, so that's why we tried in the beginning of 22 with this citizen science approach. We established an online platform which is consisted with from web page and the social media posts. And citizens can upload a photo from suspicious freshwaters. We offer example on this web page to show people what does cyano bloom look like, and then they upload on the web page, and we then sample, analyze, and then report it on the interactive map, which I will show in a second. And this is how we wanted to detect this cyanotoxic potential in Slovenia, because it's impossible for us to sample every pond, but people do know their environment and they are personal connected to waters in their proximity, so it's really, it worked out great in this year. And this is how interactive map with cyanotoxic potential looked like in summer 22. And you can imagine if you click on the flag, on the green flag, you can get a photo from the location, and this traffic light means, green light means no cyanotoxic potential, and as you can imagine, the red light means beware, the water has cyanotoxic potential. And by our experience, people really go on the internet and they look for their lakes if it's appropriate or not. But of course, it's only info connected with the last sampling. For this platform, we also got the National Award for environment-friendly service. So we were really proud that we must have done something really good. The third point is the toxicological profile. As I explained before, at the National Institute of Biology, we do also study of effects of these freshwater toxins, but also other pollutants, and we study the molecular mechanisms which are connected to human health. For example, we do in addition to cyanotoxins, we do also other natural toxins and bisphenols and metals and functional food and pollutants and all sorts of different substances. And we also develop new research models like zebrafish embryo, 3D human and zebrafish cell models, which are cultured under static and dynamic conditions, so that we can get also spheroids which are acting like a tissue. So it's a few steps forward from a single cell testing. And for take-home message, I would say that it's important to know that these primary producers, whether cyanobacteria or algae, they are essential for us. There are some that produce toxins, and it's useful to know what type of risk is this and when and where these species are present. With this later part, our platform, CyanoSlow, is very helpful. And together with citizens, we investigate this dimension of this phenomenon, which is, of course, great also for science and also for citizens as the main users of freshwaters. So to conclude, I would say that detecting freshwater biorisk detection is important, and it will get even more important in the era of climate change, which is already here. And with this few % of freshwater we have on Earth, it's all freshwater that we have. So let's be nice to it. That's it.
Thank you very much. Monitoring is very important, also biological monitoring, because if you don't know the status or quality of water, we cannot manage the water. So thank you all presenters. We would come now to the discussion and conclusion session. May I introduce to discussion some wrap up of today's presentations. Two main issues to be addressed, or which were addressed today, are management of floods and water scarcity and droughts. All countries face with this problem with different intensities and frequencies. So if we are talking about climate change or not, anyway, we have to adapt, or we have to face with these problems, which is flood risk reduction measures, water use efficiency, water reuse, and so on. Which is also important for food security and drinking water supply. So for this, it's very important to have data, to acquire data, to organize data, and about acquiring data, we heard about satellites data acquiring, LiDAR, and also measurements online or on-site are very important. And important is also to organize this data, because many countries have a lot of data, but organization of data is not so easy. Of course, we need also all data, from topographic data to climate data, hydrological data, land use, land cover, and so on, to introduce management, which is very complex. With this is very important also cooperation and capacity building, and this can be an opportunity for the LAC region and the opportunity of the European LAC Foundation. We know that managing of such complex issues as floods and droughts should be interdisciplinary, multi-sectoral, and local and national and transnational. So here education and knowledge is very important, and also public participation. So these are my points, and now I would like to start the discussion. We have some issues. Maybe we prolonged the session. We apologize for that, but I think all the presentations were very interesting, so we can afford some minutes of discussion, and then we conclude the meeting. Maybe I would pose some questions to the panelists which are here. How can you enable the participants to be more, to adapt to the floods and droughts? Maybe if we start first with João Pita Costa, if you're still here, how your system can help us to cope with such risks?
Yeah, in
how
fact,
can we actually acquire reduction measures, and so on.
In fact,
in a few sentences, please.
Yes, in fact, the participation of citizens is very important. It will bring us a new perspective on in new data, but it also needs to be careful taken into consideration on the context of this input, right? As the same as it happens with social media, the input is more, maybe more, is faster, but it needs to be validated, and it needs to be put into in the context of interlink with other types of data that make sense.
Okay, thank you. So this is actually analysis of data, but for the forecasting and early warning system, real data or the data of in nature is important. So we heard measurement of the satellite data, how they are, how can be used for the flood risk reduction and also for the drought monitoring.
Yes, we do drought monitoring, mainly agricultural drought, so it means that we are monitoring the damage done to the vegetation through vegetation indices. I'm proud to say that we, together with our environmental agency, we managed to harmonize the indices in the whole Danube region across many countries. And yes, I mean, we go even into more details now in looking into evolution of different plants and drought.
Maybe something about the early warning system and the importance of this, how to cope with and to be prepared to floods.
Floods and the weather forecast in general and precipitation is now very forecastable. So this is a huge advantage, I think, for almost the entire world. So it has to be used, it has to be upgraded to the local conditions, and of course it is, at least for Slovenia, it's quite difficult to make the short-term prognosis, which means the cell type of precipitation, thunderstorms, and so on. Of course, one thing which is extremely important, and I would underline it, in this framework of forecasting of the floods, we should at least really avoid people dying in the floods. So this is really one bottleneck we have to avoid. And if we go through a serious flooding event and nobody dies in this flooding event, we should somehow be sometimes already satisfied a little bit. And that was a similar situation last year. Ljubljana has 100-year return period or even more local precipitation. And similar question was put from the newspapers, the journalists, and say, oh, what is now with these floods and what is going on? And the basic response was, oh, everything was fine, nobody died. And this is also due to the effective forecasting system issued clear warning, people being aware, taking precautionary measures, and avoiding entering the risk zone for these forecastable events.
Thank you. We have some questions also from the chat. Mr. David Smith is asking, how can we build more effective ways to ensure the work we have heard from the Caribbean scientists influences policy in Caribbean seas? SIDC.
Let me try to answer that. It's very useful for us to hear what kind of knowledge and research is done in the region, because it also helps us, in the framework of the European Union and bilaterally also devise cooperation frameworks. So we can, we have Slovenian scientists here who heard what you're doing, and I think this gives a good opportunity to maybe see if you can do something together, but also within European Union projects or dialogues that are established and can help us introduce these topics and this knowledge into future cooperation projects.
Thank you very much. This is a very nice wrap up and introduction to the conclusions. We see that we have a lot in common. We have many issues to be addressed, and we all cope with these issues. So future cooperation is actually expected. This can be also on the basis of this webinar. We are glad to inform you that we noticed that water is very important in both regions. We had last year a very intensive webinar on this topic, on water resources management in climate change, and this year's webinar on water-related disaster risk management in changing climate. So we see that there is a need to have such events, and actually this is planned also for the next year, maybe in spring 2023. But the LAC topic for 2023 is actually sustainability. But we have also not only sustainable tourism and beekeeping, as is what's said before, but we have to have also sustainable water resources management. But for the introduction to the next year's LAC topic about sustainability, we will hear the talk from Ivan Ogando, who is the ambassador of the Dominican Republic. And this is about sustainable tourism and digitalization as areas in which Slovenia and Caribbean share challenges and opportunities. So please.
Hello, I'm very pleased to participate in this roundtable and have the opportunity to share with you some reflections about the mutual benefits of strengthening bilateral and bi-regional relations between Slovenia and the Caribbean countries. Despite being geographically apart, one of the most obvious affinities between Slovenia and Caribbean countries is that we share the challenges and opportunities of being relatively small countries. With 20,000 square kilometers and a population of 2.1 million, the socioeconomic development achieved by Slovenia in recent years and decades is a very interesting case study for the Caribbean countries in many aspects. In this regard, I would like to briefly refer to two particular topics which are of paramount importance for both parties. One is sustainable tourism, and the other is digitalization. As you might be aware, tourism is a key economic sector for most Caribbean countries, contributing up to 45% of the GDP in some countries and providing the largest source of employment. The Caribbean is considered one of the most tourism-dependable regions in the world. Actually, of the 20 most tourism-dependent small economies in the world, 13 are from the Caribbean. This is why the fall in the tourism activity due to the COVID-19 crisis caused such a radical impact in the region's economy. The IMF estimates that economic activity in the region fell by almost 10% in 2020, higher than the average economic contraction in Latin America for the same period. However, as the Caribbean slowly climbing out of the recession of 2020, we can see how the tourism sector is currently the driving force of the region's economic recovery in the post-pandemic context. Caribbean countries relied on their natural environment to attract more than 20 million visitors every year. However, the fragility of the Caribbean environment is being seriously threatened by the consequences derived from climate change and the overexploitation of natural resources. This has made the region one of the most environmentally vulnerable in the world. The erosion of the beaches, the increase in the frequency and intensity of tropical storms, the proliferation of sargassons in our seas, the pollution of both the marine and land ecosystems of the region are just a few concrete expressions of the problems that our tourist industry is currently facing. Therefore, preserving tourism as an economic engine requires ensuring that the environmental resources the sector relies upon are managed in a sustainable manner. Conscious of this fact, every country in the region has been multiplying its efforts to put in place policies and programs aimed at propelling and promoting sustainable tourism as a mechanism to improve economic stability and resilience of the travel and tourism industry. They are also committed to a Caribbean that is better prepared to respond to future pandemics and environmental sanitation threats. Natural tourism attractions of the Caribbean are famous for offering their sun, sand, and sea, while the natural attractions of Slovenia are mainly recognized by the breathtaking beauty of its lakes and mountains. However, the sustainability of the respective tourism industries depend on the quality of management of many common issues, such as the efficient use of drinking water, wastewater and solid waste disposal, nature conservation, involvement of local communities, just to mention a few. In this regard, despite the differences between the Caribbean and Slovenia, the latter can certainly serve as an important benchmark for our region, given its rich experience in the field of sustainable tourism, which has been recognized worldwide, having been ranked among the 10 most sustainable and responsible destinations in the world. Fostering the exchange of Caribbean and Slovenian experiences in terms of policies and strategies to promote sustainable tourism will be highly and mutually beneficial for both parties in order to enhance their expertise on topics related not only to preserving the environment and natural habitats, but also on how to increase the revenues from a more environmentally friendly tourist industry. In this regard, there are quite a few issues that the Caribbean could use and adapt from the 2022-2028 Strategy for Sustainable Development of Slovenian Tourism, adopted earlier this year, and which represents the basic framework for the development of a greener tourism scheme in Slovenia. Linked to the above, there's the development strategy for the digital transformation of Slovenian tourism from 2022-2026, which brings us directly to the second topic I wanted to refer as an example of the common interest between the Caribbean and Slovenia: digitalization. As we are all aware, digitalization is at the heart of the UN's Agenda 2030. It goes in line with Sustainable Development Goal 9, which aims at building resilient infrastructure, promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and fostering innovation. It is also related to providing digital skills for all, empowering women, reducing inequalities, creating sustainable development partnerships, and enable technology, among many others. In recent years, the increasing use of digital technologies has changed business models and provided new revenue and value-producing opportunities for our societies. Particularly after the COVID-19 crisis, it has taken a new dimension as a much-needed engine for the recovery of our economies and as a valuable tool to build resilience. Looking ahead, the socioeconomic development will hinge on the ability of the population to connect and use digital technologies, both privately and professionally, and on governments to lead a fair and inclusive digitalization process with effective policies. In that sense, I would like to highlight the Digital Economic Transformation Strategy 2021-2030 designed by the government of Slovenia, which is online with the EU Digital Single Market and highlights, among other things, advanced digital technologies such as artificial intelligence. Caribbean leaders are also convinced that digitalization is a fundamental tool to improve the productivity of our economies and also to enhance our competitiveness in an increasing challenging international context with nations with far more natural resources and population than us. Today, the Caribbean is more connected than ever, yet countries still face multiple digital gaps. Many people lack access to basic digital infrastructure, and for many more, the access is of poor quality or too expensive. The infrastructure investment costs in small islands make broadband expensive for consumers. Other challenges are in the areas of skills and capacity, effective regulatory frameworks, consumer protection, data privacy, and digital security. Within this context, please let me allow to briefly share with you what the government of the Dominican Republic has been doing in this area. Last year, it launched the 2030 Digital Agenda, which is a national strategy for digital transformation, which has a very ambitious goal to promote a connected, empowered society with a better quality of life and the necessary digital skills to be more competitive, efficient, and transparent. The 2030 Digital Agenda is a detailed roadmap with an action plan that identifies priority projects based on two cross-cutting themes: cybersecurity and technological innovation. The implementation of the digital agenda, it's about creating more opportunities to reduce inequalities and build a more inclusive, empowered, and connected society. Our systems will develop new digital skills to have access to more competitive jobs and to receive more and better services from the public sector and from a digitally transformed private sector. Going back to the regional context, the Caribbean has identified substantial support to its digital transformation agenda in the Team Europe, Latin America, and Caribbean Digital Alliance. The overall objective of this proposed alliance is to join effort towards achieving an inclusive and human-centered digital transformation, addressing policy cooperation on issues of common interest, such as connectivity, private sector collaboration, competitiveness, and innovation in the digital area, which includes supporting the development and broad use of digitally enabled products and e-services where the EU has a specific expertise. This action is part of a Team Europe initiative where Slovenia makes a meaningful contribution, together with other EU member states and the European Union. We recognize the role of Slovenia and its support within this framework, and we look forward to work closer together as partners, shaping our mutual future based on a green transition and on a more effective digitalization agenda. This way, we will successfully respond to the ever-changing global challenges and set the pace for sustainable and inclusive development to guarantee higher living standard, not only for our citizens, for citizens around the world. Neilipsia Huala. Muchas gracias.
So, thank you all for participating at the LAC Days 2022, and we are looking forward to hosting you at the future LAC Days events, which will be in next year. We will have a webinar on water management in climate change in the spring 2023, and in autumn there will be a webinar on sustainability, beekeeping and apitourism, where we will also search for different topics and regional strategies and synergies. Thank you very much for attending the webinar and hope to see you again next year. Thank you.